Today, we're jumping straight into a massive shift happening right now in one of the world's most volatile regions. The Middle East is arming up at a totally unprecedented rate, but as you're going to see, the rules of this game, they're completely changing. Look at the geopolitical theater of the Middle East. It's a massive, complex web of overlapping interests. We all know this region has a long history of buying serious hardware, right? But the dynamic has fundamentally shifted. It's no longer just a simple buyer-supplier relationship with the West. It's transformed into a fierce quest for strategic autonomy. These nations don't just want to buy weapons anymore. They want to make them, control them, and project power completely independently. So here is the dossier we're unpacking for you today. We're going to cover the security dilemma driving this whole thing, break down the regional power players, and track the Western arms pipeline. Then, we'll dive into the rise of domestic defense industries, and finally, look at whether there's any way to escape this crazy cycle of insecurity. All right, let's start with the theoretical anchor of all this, the security dilemma, and how game theory plays into geopolitics. To really grasp what's going on beneath the surface, we have to talk about the security dilemma. Simply put, this is a situation where one state tries to increase its security by arming up, but that inherently makes other states feel less secure. It's a concept rooted in the foundational game theory work of scholars like Thomas Schelling and Louis Fry Richardson. They realize that defensive buildups create an inescapable paradox. It's like when you build a stronger wall, your neighbor naturally assumes they need a taller ladder. And this action-reaction loop plays out in real time. Just picture it. Step 1, State A arms up strictly for defense. Step 2, State B looks at that and perceives a threat, regardless of what State A's true intentions actually were. So Step 3, State B arms up to counter. It's this rhythmic, back-and-forth ticking clock. You end up with a system where mutual distrust just fuels a continuous, escalating cycle of militarization. And once it starts, man, it is incredibly hard to stop. So who's actually playing this game? Let's open up a strategic dossier on the regional power players. Taking a macro view of the key players here reveals some really distinct and often clashing motivations. Saudi Arabia is heavily focused on regional deterrence, the Yemen conflict, and regime protection, historically leaning on high-tech imports from the US and UK. Iran, on the other hand, is heavily sanctioned, so they operate with a totally different playbook, building asymmetric warfare capabilities and relying on domestic production of missiles and drones. Then you have Israel, focused squarely on preemptive defense and maintaining a qualitative military edge. And finally, the UAE has these regional middle power ambitions, pushing hard for smart defense and developing their own industry. So 4 very different players running 4 completely different strategic playbooks. Let's juxtapose the 2 fiercest rivals in the region for a second, Israel and Iran. Israel relies on a qualitative military edge. We're talking US-backed, highly advanced tech and absolute air dominance, using platforms like F-35 fighter jets and the Iron Dome missile defense system. Iran operates under strict international sanctions, so they really lean into sanctions-driven self-reliance. Their doctrine is built on asymmetric warfare. Think massive arsenals of Shahed loitering munitions, ballistic missiles, and an extensive network of non-state proxies. It's literally high-tech conventional dominance going head-to-head with sprawling asymmetric influence. Now, to truly understand the sheer scale of this arms race, you have to look at the money. $61 billion. That was Saudi Arabia's defense budget for the year 2023 alone. This massive financial commitment keeps the kingdom right at the very top of global military spending. This isn't just political maneuvering. The amount of capital flowing here is absolutely staggering. Which leads us to the enablers of all this spending. Let's look at the Western arms pipeline and the massive contradictions it creates. If you thought $61 billion in a single year was a heavy hitter, take a look at this. $116 billion. That's the total sum Saudi Arabia has spent on global arms purchases over just the past decade. It's a dramatic punch of a number, right? And it really highlights the profound role that Western defense exporters play in this complex web of the international arms trade. Western suppliers are deeply, deeply entangled in this ecosystem. Take the United Kingdom, for example. More than half of all UK arms exports are directed solely to the Saudi kingdom. Think about that for a second. That's a massive reliance on a single buyer in a highly volatile region, showing just how inextricably linked European defense economies are to Middle Eastern militarization. But of course, this pipeline doesn't exist in a vacuum. These incredibly lucrative defense contracts come with severe ethical and legal contradictions.
We see intense global political pressure regarding the humanitarian toll in conflicts like Yemen. Germany, for instance, instituted temporary export bans to involve states, only to later resume some of them. Meanwhile, Scandinavian countries like Sweden have implemented stricter export controls, yet paradoxically, they've simultaneously seen rising sales of munitions to the UAE. It's an unbelievably delicate tightrope walk for these Western nations. They're constantly trying to balance billions of dollars in economic interests against human rights concerns and domestic political pressure. All right, moving on to the rise of domestic defense, the shift from buyers to producers. And this brings us to what is arguably the most crucial geopolitical pivot of our entire briefing today. Saudi Vision 2030 is the perfect example of this shift. The Gulf states are realizing that relying on the West for weapons actually leaves them vulnerable to those exact political and ethical debates we were just talking about. So Saudi Arabia launched SAMI, the Saudi Arabian Military Industries. Their goal, to localize defense production. They want to be self-sufficient so they can independently counter regional threats, like the Houthis, without having to sit around and wait for a Western export license to get approved. And Saudi Arabia isn't doing this alone. The UAE is also rapidly modernizing through their indigenous defense conglomerate, the Edge Group. They're leveraging local manufacturing, sure, but more importantly, they are strategically diversifying their global partnerships. They aren't just looking west anymore. The UAE is out there forging new military deals with China, engaging with Russia, and officially joining BRICS. This is a massive structural shift toward absolute strategic autonomy. So you might be wondering, how is the West reacting to this massive change? Well, European defense firms are realizing they have to move beyond simple transactional arms deals. To lock in their influence, they're establishing long-term industrial joint ventures. They're actually facilitating vital technology and know-how transfers, literally co-producing advanced radar and missile systems directly on Gulf soil. The reality is, if they can't just sell the finished weapons anymore, they're adapting by helping to build the defense industries themselves. So where does this leave us? Let's talk about escaping the insecurity cycle and the path forward. What does all this shifting towards strategic autonomy ultimately mean for the future stability of the Middle East? The source analysis points to a very clear conclusion. Simply managing bilateral one-on-one tensions is no longer enough. True stability requires a multilateral governance framework. Because as long as states are caught in that game theory action-reaction loop we looked at earlier, well, more weapons are just going to mean more fear. The only real way out is prioritizing diplomacy, regional cooperation, and mutual security guarantees over strictly militarized solutions. And that leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question. Can the Middle East actually escape the cycle of insecurity, or will these localized defense industries only deepen the dilemma? When these nations no longer need Western permission to arm themselves, does that newly found independence actually bring regional security, or does it simply accelerate the ticking clock of escalation? That is the big takeaway from this explainer today. The game has fundamentally changed, and the stakes have literally never been higher.